Philippines Center for Governance, and I am pleased to usher you to the first installment of the 2024 CBILLS Thursday Talks. So before we hand over the floor to our esteemed moderator, we'd like to recognize the presence of our resource speakers. First, we have Director Reverie Pure Sapuan, or Sapaen from NEDA. We also have Director Maria L. Atienza from the UP Department of Political Science. So I will no longer delay our first lecture, so let me call on the CBILLS Program Manager, Ms. Sheena Mateo, for an overview of the theme of this year's lecture series and to introduce our esteemed moderator.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Ange. It is my honor again to open this year's Thursday Talks. Our Thursday Talks has been one of my favorite components since the very first time we conceptualized this program back in 2018. During the pilot program with our appropriations and finance group. So back then, being able to discuss with experts and leaders and talk about the most pressing and current issues as well as recommend possible solutions is truly a rewarding learning experience. Through this series, we can put forward policy advocacies that needs to be tackled, allowing our key players in the legislative, our scholars, another source of policy voices from our stakeholders. So as we develop and improve this component, we ensure that our topics are relevant and attuned to the government's development agenda. And before I give the overview for this year's theme, allow me to provide everyone with a brief recap of how we have aligned our lecture series to the priorities of our government and to the emerging trends and prospects in the past 7 years. When the CBILLS program officially started in 2018, the lecture series component served as an elective session that tackled legislative process, budget monitoring, and data analytics for the pilot batch from the Committee on Appropriations and the Legislative Budget Research and Monitoring Office of the House of Representatives and Senate, respectively. The following year, the CBILLS program expanded the pool of scholars from the various offices of the Congress and introduced 3 learning tracks, namely the emerging leaders, the middle managers, and the senior leaders. Furthermore, the lecture series was called the Thursday Talks because for the practical reason that usually there are no plenary sessions during Thursdays. Kaya sabi nga, medyo slightly free daw po tayo from our principals. Tama po ba yun? So, the lecture series then was centered on using evidence-based data for policy making and advancing climate action and sustainability. Now, with the onset of the pandemic in 2020, the program shifted to online. So the Thursday Talks was implemented through a webinar series from 2020 to 2022. The theme for the first year of the pandemic revolved around its effects on policymaking, health systems, human rights, and education. And then the following year, the series discussed necessary institutional and social transformation in various sectors of the country to achieve a better normal society. With a focus on digitalization initiatives, the Thursday Talks webinars focus on trends to rebuild political and socioeconomic development while ensuring policy innovation in both traditional and digital landscapes to usher the country into a new normal. With a gradual transition to in-person training activities, the 2023 Thursday Talk series conducted 2 of its 5 lectures in hybrid mode. Here, we emphasize that the critical review of past development policy would eventually inform future policy reforms to promote inclusivity and resiliency. In the same year, the series introduced new publication initiatives alongside the lectures to elevate the policy advocacy arm of the CBILLS through HAYAG, the legislative notes on policies that matter, and establishing the program's website. The component aimed to expand the program's reach and generate more interest and discussion on relevant economic and socio-political issues. Now, this year, the overarching theme of the series is centered on anchoring sustainable Philippine development in the pillars of innovative and participatory governance. International organizations, governments, and civil society have come to a consensus over the last decade on the importance of governance in economic and social development. With this, government efficiency and impact can be increased by strengthening good governance, especially in the aspects of accountability, transparency, participation, and predictability. Thus, the theme highlights the critical role of innovation in fortifying these 4 elements towards transformative policymaking to promote an inclusive, resilient, and sustainable future for Filipinos. Each lecture will discuss the global and national crises and issues that merit rethinking of perspectives to solicit innovative, sustainable, and appropriate approaches. So overall, our objective is to broaden your perspective on the key trends and developments in the socio-political and economic spheres of the country and deepen your understanding of the impact of these trends on public policy making. Through this series, we also aim to promote the discipline of long-term planning and to provide a venue for discussing strategic issues that impact socio-political and economic governance. So, without further ado, it is my privilege also to introduce our first moderator for this year's series. It is also with pride that we open this lecture with our very own from DAP. Our moderator is DAP's very own Vice President of the Center for Governance and our CBILLS boss. She oversees the design and delivery of training, research, and technical assistance that aim to capacitate public sector organizations to effectively develop and implement public policies and programs that promote transparent and accountable governance. She is a graduate of Development Planning from the University of Queensland, Brisbane, Australia. She completed her Bachelor of Arts degree, major in Political Science from the University of Santo Tomas, Manila. Her decades of experience from DAP, overseeing the conceptualization and implementation of multiple projects and programs, has contributed to the transformation of several government agencies and local governments towards good governance. So, with that, Ma'am Aimee.
Thank you, Sheena, our CBILLS manager. And she will soon deliver a CBILLS baby. So good afternoon again, everyone. We're very pleased to have this first lecture series for 2024. And again, as you've seen, we are having a theme on strengthening public accountability and participatory governance for sustainable development as our first topic. And this first lecture series introduces the interconnection between Philippine political institutions and sustainable development through the lens of good governance and public accountability. It also highlights the importance of the rule of law, transparency, and participatory governance in fostering citizens' trust and public accountability in order to strengthen democratic institutions that no one is left behind, to ensure that no one is left behind. So lastly, this lecture aims to problematize what democracy means for Filipinos to the context of the changing social, political, and economic landscapes. So we have with us distinguished resource persons who will help us address our objectives this afternoon. They're very worried actually because it's the that time of the day where we are invited to snooze. So please promise that no one will sleep. So they're very worried and concerned about the timing. But we make sure that it will be a very interesting discussion. So allow me to introduce our first speaker. So as you can see, this is an all-lady lecture series that we're starting today. Okay. So allow me to introduce our first speaker. She is the Director 4 of the National Economic Development Authority Governance Staff, and she specializes in policy review and formulation, as well as monitoring and assessing of governance and SDG frameworks of the Philippine Development Plan. She is the head of the Secretariat to the DBCC's Subcommittee on Sustainable Development Goals, and head of the Secretariat to the Interagency Committee on Good Governance. She served as a legal focal for the Build, Operate, Transfer, Public-Private Partnership, and Joint Venture Matters from 2011 to 2018. She is a Lee Kuan Yew Senior Fellow in Public Policy, and she is a law graduate of the Sambeda College of Law in Mendiola, Manila, and a political science graduate of the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She was a litigation lawyer prior to joining the NEDA in 2011. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're happy to have this afternoon Attorney Reverie Pure Garcia Sapaen.
Thank you, Ma'am Amy, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a privilege really to be here, not only because I'm in the midst of this body of people, no, who are like part of Congress, but I'm also very privileged to share the stage with my former UP professor, Professor Ella Atienza. So in a way, you could say it's like coming full circle, sharing the stage with an idol, no? She was also the professor of my husband, who's very proud to say that he got one of his highest grades from Prof. Ella. So, yabang niya, no? I can't remember my grade, baka dos lang binigay ni Prof. But anyway, also noting the observation of VP Amy that it seems that the platform is filled with women. So I just want to point out that this contributes to our SDG indicator 16, no? On increasing the participation of women. So anyway, with that, I think everyone is alive and awake. Tama ba? Okay. So, allow me to share with you, parang malapit, NEDA's perspective on strengthening public accountability and participatory governance in the Philippines. So, good governance and public accountability is not just about ticking boxes or meeting our targets. It's really about fostering trust, fostering dialogue, and fostering change. And as we embark on the discussion this afternoon, to explore the intersection between public accountability, participatory governance, and the SDGs, let us challenge ourselves to rethink the very essence of governance and its role in driving meaningful progress. So allow me to walk you through my outline for my presentation this afternoon. I will be discussing very briefly some of the basic principles of public accountability and participatory governance, and then proceed to providing you with the link between these concepts and the Sustainable Development Goals. I will also discuss some of the current challenges that we are facing in the country in terms of public accountability and participatory governance. And then we'll provide you with an overview of the Philippine Development Plan and the strategies that we have incorporated to strengthen public accountability and governance. I will also touch on partnerships and collaboration, also on monitoring and evaluation, and some of the best practices that we've adopted in the country. And then I will conclude my presentation. Okay, so the principle of participatory governance is actually enshrined in our very own 1987 Philippine Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. Particularly, this is provided in Section 1, Article 2, our Declaration of Principles and State Policies, which states that the Philippines is a democratic and republican state. Sovereignty resides in the people, and all government authority emanates from them. So this provision embodies the principle of participatory governance because it emphasizes that sovereignty lies with the people. And what does this mean? It implies that citizens have the right to participate in all government processes, including decision-making, policy formulation, and implementation. In fact, the Constitution also has other or various provisions that touch on or cover these principles. And these are the provisions on local government autonomy, people's initiative and referendum, and the protection of our civil liberties as provided in Article 3, our Bill of Rights. All of these provisions underscore the importance of participatory governance in the Philippine context. Now, with respect to public accountability, we can find this in Section 1, Article 9 of our Constitution, which states that public office is a public trust. Public officers and employees must at all times be accountable to the people, serve them with utmost responsibility, integrity, loyalty, and efficiency, act with patriotism and justice, and lead modest lives. But let us also consider how these principles are defined internationally. So for us, we actually make reference to the Panther Principles, which is a set of human rights principles devised by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. So Panther is actually a mnemonic which stands for the human rights principles of P, participation, A, accountability, N is for non-discrimination, T for transparency, H for human dignity, E for empowerment, and R for rule of law. But let us just focus on two principles for our discussion this afternoon. So the human rights principle of participation is defined as the direct control, ownership, and management by the people of public decision-making. Participation is inclusive. It actively encourages people to organize themselves and to genuinely, freely, actively participate in decision-making. It also mandates the incorporation of people's views in all public decisions and actions. Of course, participation should be voluntary. It is recognized by law, it is free, and not subject to sanction or threat. Meanwhile, the Panther principle of accountability is defined as responsiveness to those who are most affected by our decisions, our actions, and the performance of our duties. And these are especially those who are in our vulnerable sectors or those most at risk at being excluded and discriminated. When we speak of accountability, it also entails fairness in our conduct, in our treatment, in all our actions. And it also includes the vision of achieving human rights objectives and outcomes. And also the concept of responsibility. And when we speak of responsibility here, it's not just about our responsibility in formulating laws, which is the mandate of Congress, to pass laws, to pass policies, but more importantly, responsibility here, it pertains to taking responsibility for the consequences of the laws we pass, of the policies we formulate, and for the programs, activities, and projects that we implement. In the context of national development, stakeholders pertain to different individuals, groups, and entities that have an interest or a stake in the development process and outcomes. And as you know, all of these stakeholders play various roles, and they all contribute to shaping policies and implementing programs, and ultimately driving the achievement of our national development objectives. And as you can see in this slide, these are just some of the key stakeholders in national development. And we have also indicated some of their more important roles. So for the first stakeholder, which is government, that is us, our primary role actually is formulating and implementing laws and development policies, plans, and programs. Government is also the entity that delivers public goods and services such as healthcare, education, infrastructure, and social welfare. And then it is also government that actually establishes the regulatory frameworks that foster that climate that is conducive for the delivery of public services, conducive for investment. No? So now we proceed to civil society. And when we speak of civil society, this will encompass a wide range of non-governmental organizations, community-based groups, advocacy organizations, and professional associations. And what we typically know of civil society, this is the segment of society that actually monitors the government, how we are actually performing our roles, and whether we are actually efficiently providing the services that is expected from us. It is civil society that also advocates for the rights and the interest of marginalized and the most vulnerable sectors of society. And well, in addition to that, they also provide social services, humanitarian assistance, and sometimes capacity building initiatives for the communities. And it's usually also civil society that mobilizes our communities for collective action and raises awareness and promotes civic engagement. And the third stakeholder is our private sector, and usually this will encompass our businesses, our corporations, and entrepreneurs, and all of them actually contribute through providing jobs and opportunities that drive economic growth. Of course, we should not forget the academe. These are academic and research institutions. These are our universities, our research institutes, our think tanks that play a very vital role because it is this sector that actually provides us with research, with empirical data on which we should base our policies and our laws. So through the work that they do, our policies should be informed. And also, we have our international organizations, our donor agencies, and other development partners, which actually provide us with expertise, technical assistance, and other resources to support our national development efforts. So, among others, we have the World Bank, UNDP, the ADB, no? And other UN agencies. And finally, we have our citizens, which actually are the, we can say, I think, the final consumers of all the things that we do, because it is for them that we actually endeavor to pass good laws, responsive laws, formulate policies, and in creating very responsive PAPs. And also, it is the citizens that provide us the feedback on whether we as government, whether we are doing a good job. No? So, all of these actors will contribute to shaping the development agenda. So, working with them is very important so that we can make meaningful steps towards achieving our national development goals. So in this slide, let us have a look at how we link public accountability, participatory governance, and the sustainable development goals. So we have identified here SDG 16. And SDG 16 is peace, justice, and strong institutions. So SDG 16 is all about promoting peaceful and inclusive institutions. It's about providing access to justice for all and building an effective, inclusive, and accountable institution at all levels. So I don't know if you are dozing off, but maybe I should check on the general knowledge of everyone on the SDGs just to ensure that everyone is still up and is still with me. Okay, from this table, what is SDG 4? Ma'am Aimee will provide the prize. Any brave soul who can volunteer, what is SDG 4? Huwag muna kayo mag-Google. Nagising na sila, ma'am.
Hello. Is it quality education?
Are you asking me?
Quality education.
Okay. Very good. Yes, it is. Maybe you can point to another table and give an SDG number. Parang loto lang to. Pero hindi hanggang 36 yung SDG, di ba, ma'am? SDG, gender equality is SDG 5. Okay, you can point to another table and give another SDG.
Mic test.
No poverty. 1.
What's the number?
Number 1.
SDG 1. Thank you, Gia. How many SDGs are there? Okay. So, okay, I think everyone is up pa, no? So, okay, allow me to continue. I just wanted to make sure that you're still with me. So, so we're on SDG 16, no? This is the SDG that pertains or is relevant to the principles of accountability and participatory governance. And as you can see in this slide, we've indicated the targets for SDG 16. And these are all related to citizen trust, public accountability, participatory governance, and the rule of law. So the first you can see there is 16.3. Promote the rule of law at the national and international levels and ensure equal access to justice for all. 16.5 is about corruption and bribery. So we want to reduce corruption and bribery in all its forms. 16.6 is on developing effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. 16.7 is ensuring responsive, inclusive, participatory, and representative decision-making at all levels. 16.10 covers public access to information, and 16.A is on strengthening relevant national institutions. Okay. So in the next slides, I will discuss the performance of the Philippines so far in the SDGs. And to track the performance of the Philippines, the Philippine Statistics Authority is the agency that is tasked to monitor and regularly monitor the Philippine SDG indicators. And the PSA produces or uses this tool called the SDG Watch. The SDG Watch is the repository of all SDG indicators. And when you can actually access this in the PSA website, and the SDG Watch will provide you with the baseline data, the latest data, and our target data. And the targets were actually updated in 2019 through a series of consultation workshops. And in 2023, the PSA released the second updating of the SDG Watch. So for now, the Philippines is monitoring about 157 indicators. So of the 157, we have 97 global indicators, 34 proxy indicators, and then we have 26 supplemental indicators. And we will see in the next slide how we are faring. Okay? So for the first target on promoting the rule of law at the national and international level, so our indicator there, as you can see, is unsentenced detainees as a proportion of overall inmate population. So the latest data for 2022 shows us that there is a significant decline in this indicator. And then with respect to the other indicators for substantially reducing corruption and bribery in all forms, we have also seen a significant decline across all types of government service except access to justice. So what does this slide tell us, particularly on 16.5? We see that there is less bribery in terms of people trying to avail of social services, people trying to pay, our citizens paying their taxes, and securing their licenses. So there has been a decrease there, no, in corruption and bribery incidents. But we see an increase in corruption and bribery when it comes to access to justice. So from 0.9, it has increased to 2.4. Let's move on to target 16.6. This is to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. And while we don't have any targets here, and our indicator is actually primary government expenditures, we can still see the trend that in terms of government spending, we have actually been increasing. So there is a steady increase in government spending to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions. Okay, so the next 3 slides will show us the indicators for target 16.7. And 16.7 pertains to ensuring responsive, inclusive, participatory, and representative decision-making at all levels. The first indicator here is proportion of positions in national and local institutions, including the legislature. So this is very does this include the legislature, House of Reps lang ba lahat nandito? Pareho, ma'am. Senate and the House. So, ayun, no? So, this will be of interest to you. Kasi you can see here, actually, the global target here is to achieve at least parity among men and women, 50-50 representation. Although there is no national target, that is actually the global target. But you can see that from 2016, there is lesser or a decline in women in the legislature compared to the baseline in 2016 at 28.5. But we have seen an increase in the proportion of males in the positions at 73.1 in 2022 from 71.5 in 2016. Although we're not saying that's bad, no. It depends on the Philippine context. Just as an anecdote, I'm also the head of the Secretariat to the Interagency on Good Governance, and the interagency committee there was not entirely sure. No, it was actually did not choose to adapt the proportion of positions of women and men in the legislature and in local government positions, kasi of certain valid arguments na it depends on merit and fitness and all of that. So this is we just take it into context, but this is the current the status, no, in terms of this indicator. And then on the next slide, this is for those in the public service. So you can see that in the public service as a whole, there's increase in female participation and there is a decrease of male participation, as well as in the career and non-career position, medyo bumaba din yung female participation with an increase in the male, no? And then on the succeeding slide, this is for the judiciary. We see an increase in female participation as opposed to the males. Okay. So let's move on to the next target, which is target 16.10. And this focuses on access to information and protecting our fundamental freedoms. So the indicator that was adopted by the Philippines is on adopting and implementing constitutional, statutory, or policy guarantees for public access to information. So there is a check mark there to indicate that we have satisfied this indicator. In fact, we have in place EO number 2, series of 2016 that allows us to, that has mandated all of the executive to adopt an FOI manual. No? I'm sure everyone is familiar with that. And then with respect to target 16.A, this is to strengthen relevant national institutions, including through international cooperation for building capacity at all levels. And the indicator here is having an independent national human rights institution. So we have satisfied this indicator because we have the Commission on Human Rights that serves as our independent national human rights institution in the country. Okay. So earlier, that was the SDG Watch, which tracks our current progress. Now we move on to the SDG Pace of Progress. So it's still 2022 because PSA has yet to publish the 2023. But this will provide us a determination of whether we will be able to achieve our 2030 targets. And the PSA uses this Pace of Progress tool because it will reflect our current status index and our anticipated index. No? And in essence, it just tells us, will we meet our goals by 2030? So you can see here, actually, the ones that you can that are kind of parang hindi siya solid na red or not solid blue. These are actually goals that were indicators where we do not have sufficient data for our indicators. But nevertheless, the current status index assesses the current state of progress by creating a linkage between the progress made since 2000 in relation to the progress needed to achieve by 2030. And you can see there that the length of each bar shows the progress of the country since the year 2000. And if a bar crosses that line on 2022, then that means it has made the expected progress to date. Meanwhile, if a bar shows advancement but misses the 2022 line, it means that we've made progress but we fell short to achieve the expected progress. And then if we see a bar going the opposite direction, that's in red, that means we are regressing. And based on the 2022 SDG pace of progress, 8 of the 17 goals have sufficient indicators. So these are the ones in solid colors, solid blue and red colors. And as can be seen on this chart, sadly, none of the SDGs have crossed the 2022 line, although SDG 17 appears to have reached, seems to have reached or crossed over the 2022 line, but there is insufficient indicator, so we cannot really rely on whether this is really accurate. But for SDG 16, there are only 2 indicators where we have measurable pace of progress. And it will show that SDG 16 is advancing kasi it's in blue, but we missed our expected progress. And since it's in not a solid blue color, it also has insufficient indicators. And some of the indicators, we have no targets that were identified. Now let's move on to the next slide. No? And this will show us our pace, our anticipated progress. And what is anticipated progress? It's the likelihood of meeting excuse me, the 2030 targets, assuming that the pace of progress is sustained. And here it shows that the Philippines is on track to meet the 2030 targets only for 11 indicators. So we're only 16.9% on track in terms of meeting the 2030 agenda. And then 31 indicators or 47.7% needs acceleration, whereas 35.4% are regressing. So we are regressing in 23 indicators. But UNESCOP also notes that the difficulties in measuring particularly SDG 16 is due to lack of reliable governance statistics, which limits our ability to develop specific measures. Nonetheless, we have made efforts to actually integrate SDG 16 indicators in the Philippine Development Plan so that we can still identify programs and initiatives that will help us in attaining this SDG goal. And admittedly, there are a lot of challenges that we are facing and that hinder us from achieving good governance and from meeting the sustainable development goals. And among the many challenges that we are faced with, we have the problem of corruption, We have the problem of institutional weaknesses, and there's still limited citizen engagement. So when we speak of corruption, even one very minor incident of corruption can actually have that impact of eroding a decade's worth of reforms in improving governance, and it really erodes public trust. So parang we're always brought back to square one. Government will have to work again to gain public trust, no? And we've been working so hard for so long to improve this environment of really gaining the trust of our citizenry. And then when we speak of institutional weaknesses, this can be brought about by our limited resources. Of course, we know that we are really faced with financial constraints. And not only that, we also lack technical capacity, especially at the local level. So that is why there is a need to really capacitate not only officials at the national level, but also our local counterparts. Because, many of the programs really that affect our citizenry directly are services, are services and goods that are delivered directly by our local government units. So it's very important that they be capacitated. And anyway, DAP is here, di ba, ma'am? To help. So, and then, of course, there's limited citizen engagement. We have so many platforms already. We've tried to digitalize, put online platforms. We have all of these CSO desks, the hotlines, but sometimes these are really not enough. And even for available platforms online, many are still excluded by reason of we have the digital divide, and we all know that. And because we have these vulnerable sectors, and because of limited engagement, there's also the danger that we actually miss out on providing interventions that are important to these most vulnerable sectors, just because they do not have the access to all of these feedback mechanisms where we can actually listen to all their concerns. So given that context, given the SDGs and the current problems that we are facing, we see actually the alignment of the 2030 Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, with our Ambisyon Natin 2040. And the Ambisyon Natin 2040 is what? Is we all want a matatag, maginhawa, at panatag na buhay para sa lahat. And as you can see here, the SDGs, we have tried to mainstream all of this into the Philippine Development Plan. So the SDGs are reflected in our priorities, in our plans, in our programs, and this has started way back in 2017 with the Philippine Development Plan 2017-2022. So that was really a foundational step in mainstreaming the SDGs into our priorities, our plans as a country. And also, of course, ensuring that this will continue across different administrations. So this year's PDP, actually, PDP 2023 to 2028, is a plan for deep economic and social transformation. And this is a second medium-term plan that is anchored on our Ambisyon Natin 2040. And it is also the second national development plan that mainstreams the SDGs. And then the overall goal of our PDP is to reinvigorate job creation and accelerate poverty reduction, steer the economy back on the high growth path, and effect economic and social transformation for a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient society. And of course, we recognize that we need collaboration, coordinated efforts between government, the public sector, the private sector, civil society, and all the other stakeholders that I mentioned earlier. This, you can see, is our national government strategy. So that is the overall framework of the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028. We see here our overall outcomes. The overall goal is to achieve a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay. That's our ambition natin 2040. And then the one in blue, as I said earlier, the goal of this current administration is to effect that economic transformation for a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient society. And then we see the sub-outcomes, the ones in red and green. So the ones clustered in red pertain to the earning capability of the individual, no? and the family. And then the next set in green pertain to our production sectors in generating more jobs, quality jobs, and green jobs. And finally, those in blue are what we call our cross-cutting strategy, or bedrock strategies, no? And one of the main foundations would be practicing good governance and improving bureaucratic efficiency. And that would be Chapter 14 of our Philippine Development Plan. So here we can see the link between all of those, and they are embodied in Chapter 14 of our PDP, which is the chapter on practicing good governance and improving bureaucratic efficiency, as well as Chapter 13, that focuses on ensuring peace and security and enhancing the administration of justice. And in these two chapters of the PDP, we mainstreamed the indicators, the targets of SDG Goal 16 on peace and justice and strong institutions. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. And this is the overall strategic framework of Chapter 14. And of course, the PDP recognizes that a strong and vibrant economy is enabled by good governance, which fosters a high-trust society and a favorable business climate that are necessary to achieve our development goals. So while not all of the SDG indicators are mainstreamed in the PDP, the government strategies still contribute to the attainment of the SDG targets. And allow me to elaborate shortly on the strategic framework of Chapter 14. Actually, as you can see in this slide, the first two outcomes provide all the strategies for practicing good governance. And then the latter two on your right are all those that pertain to improving government efficiency. And you will observe that all of these strategies are actually cross-cutting because these are all efforts toward vertical integration of national government and the LGUs. We also take into consideration the Mandanas ruling and how it impacts the delivery of services by the LGUs. And we also focus on partnerships with the private sector and dedicated efforts to account for marginalized sectors in evidence-based policy making, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. Okay, so we will zero in on them one by one. No? For the first outcome, which is on participatory governance deepened, let's just go briefly through some of the strategies that are provided in the PDP. So the first is government will ensure sufficient and functional participatory spaces. And how will we do that? We can do that by increasing the availability and the accessibility of protected spaces. And when we do that, we should ensure that they are also functional spaces. And this can be done through all the platforms that are established according to certain policy standards. And for example, the DBM will intensify the CSO participation in the national budget preparation process. So and then we also have the DILG that is expanding the functionality of the local special bodies and the people's councils. And then this is also under the DBM. We have the Philippine Open Government Partnership. I don't know if everyone is aware of that, but it's a mechanism, a platform wherein the government and the private sector, actually the CSOs and other non-government organizations come together as co-equal partners to promote transparency and good governance. And with respect to the second strategy, which is to broaden public access to information, so government will build on the gains of our freedom of information implementation. We all have that FOI manual now. But of course, we are also improving on the e-FOI portal services and intensifying the partnerships with the local governments. Add to that, the DICT is also enhancing the volume and scope of information in the Open Data Philippines and in the provision of free Wi-Fi services in public areas. And then when we speak of improving the quality of participation, this also pertains to the implementation of participatory governance metrics for assessing the quality of participation in local special bodies. And the DILG will strengthen the Council on Good Local Governance and intensify the capacity development interventions for CSO members. And of course, also under this outcome is increasing inclusivity and accessibility of elections. So here, COMELEC will have to expand the use of satellite and special registrations, innovate voting modalities, and intensify voters' education. So these are just among the many strategies that are identified. And then we go to outcome 2, which pertains to bolstering public accountability and integrity. And under this PDP chapter, the government will actually enhance public feedback loops, and by ensuring the functionality, efficiency, and effectiveness of all these feedback platforms. So what are these? We have the CSO desks, the barangay violence against women help desks, and then we also have the monitoring and the resolution of citizen reports. These are all through the ARTAS Harmonized Client Satisfaction Measurement. And then there's also the CSC Contact ng Bayan, Contact Center ng Bayan. So there are many feedback mechanisms in place already. And then we hope that this will be further strengthened through digital technology to augment all of these mechanisms. And a strategy also here is to intensify transparency in public spending through the full implementation of the EODB and EGSD Act. Also through the better integration of government units and the observance of open contracting data standards in the PhilJEPs. So this pertains to our procurement process also. And the timely publication of budget and financial accountability reports through the Transparency Seal. Also identified here is the expansion of the COA's Citizen Participatory Audit. And on strengthening the implementation and monitoring of anti-corruption laws and programs. So this will be done through the Integrity Management Program, the SAL and declarations, and other public integrity campaigns. And finally, to improve national governance assessments. So the government will hasten to develop and roll out a national governance index and intensify the national evaluation policy framework and maintain the implementation of the Seal of Good Local Governance, or yung SGLG. So just a note on the National Governance Index. So this is actually under our staff, no, the governance staff of NEDA, and we're already in the process of the development of this index. We have engaged the services of a consultant to help us develop this national governance index to really, because for so long we have depended on global indices. But through this National Governance Index, we hope to be able to capture really the Philippine context of governance to better inform our policies and our programs. So we're really keeping our fingers crossed that this will be developed by the end of this year. And I think this is the slide that will interest you because you're all from Congress. So you might take note, I hope that you will take note of the legislative agenda that will promote public accountability and participatory governance. So these are the following. Right sizing. So this, when we right size, this will implement transformational improvements to streamline the functions, the mandates, the structure, and staffing of departments and agencies. So we all know that right sizing is not necessarily or does not necessarily translate to downsizing, but it's really all about coming up with the ideal structure, the ideal number, the ideal set of functions so that we can, as a government, discharge our functions more efficiently and be more responsive to our citizenry. The next legislative agenda is the e-governance, which is intended to promote the use of ICT in improving government service delivery and providing access to reliable data and information. Alam ko, natapos na yata to sa House, no? Yeah, so, nasa Senate na yata siya ngayon. And then we have the budget modernization, and this is intended or seeks to institutionalize the cash-based budgeting system to strengthen fiscal discipline in the allocation and use of budget resources. It will also promote public participation in the local budgeting process for shared accountability. Next slide, we have the freedom of information, which will require government agencies to allow the public to review and copy all official information. So through this, we hope to promote meaningful and increased participation of the citizens in our decision-making and in public accountability. And then we also have here the National Evaluation Policy, which is intended to strengthen the legal and institutional frameworks for regular measurement, reporting, and the utilization of the results of public policies, programs, and projects towards supporting evidence-based decisions. Okay. I'm being told to wrap up. So anyway, so moving forward, these are some of the strategies wherein we want to deepen participatory governance. So we want to mainstream the PHOGP. I already mentioned this is the platform between government and the CSOs and the non-government organizations. So this is already in place at the national level, but what the DEBM seeks to do is to also bring this down to the regional level so that this can really be mainstream. No, we can talagang really bring it down, to localize it. And then, government also intends to intensify the anti-corruption efforts by broadening the agency's involvement and implementing high-impact programs by tapping interagency platforms such as the Presidential United Nations Convention against Corruption Interagency Committee. So we're tapping that platform. I think this is called the PUICOM. And then further to these strategies, there is a need to expedite the passage of the e-governance bill to accelerate systems development and bolster cybersecurity measures in the government. Yeah, very important cybersecurity because recently, I think the DOST, the Philippine Coast Guard systems were hacked, no? So there's really that urgent need to address all these cybersecurity concerns. And of course, digital transformation will really result in more efficient and faster delivery of public services. And also, we take note that digitalization also really stops and prevents corruption. And aside from these strategies, we recognize the importance of partnerships and collaboration. They are all important to ensure that we work together to achieve our common national development goals. So we have our multi-stakeholder partners, and we also learn from our development partners from other countries, in fact, on their best practices on how to promote good governance, how to engage more people, and to ensure public accountability. And of course, very important is that we continue to monitor our performance, because it is only through monitoring also that we learn, are we doing okay? And we evaluate also, what are our gaps? What are the interventions that we need to fill in those gaps, to fill in those weaknesses? So, in monitoring and evaluation, it's very important that we establish a set of indicators for monitoring our progress, whether we are meeting our development targets. And of course, while we monitor, it's not enough that we monitor, we should also regularly assess and report. And this is for purposes of enhancing transparency and accountability. And of course, part of monitoring and evaluation is making use of all these feedback loops and continuously improving the feedback loops, so that we can provide a timely response to the citizens' demands. Because when we are able to timely respond to them, this increases their trust in government. This improves public trust. And so I will just provide you with a brief overview of our indicator on public accountability, on good governance. So this is how we monitor whether we are meeting our targets, our development goals. And as you can see in this slide, we actually use the Worldwide Governance Indicator. So this is the WGI. And this will cover the performance of the Philippines from 2019 to 2022. And as you can see, there's minimal change. In terms of voice and accountability, our percentile rank is actually improving as compared to the recent trend. And on government effectiveness, there is a steady increase in our percentile ranks. And but on regulatory quality, we have seen a decline. Meanwhile, for control of corruption, the steady improvement from 2019 to 2021 has started to dip. So you can see here, there was an increase from 31 to 33.3, tapos 33.8, and suddenly 2022, we are at 33.5. So, but in general, these results indicate that the Philippines, that governance in the Philippines is participatory and public services are becoming effective, but the regulatory aspect and the corruption aspect in our governance are our weaknesses. So, okay. And we move on very briefly. We want to compare our performance to our ASEAN neighbors. So for 2022, unfortunately, the Philippines is lagging behind its peers. So much like our SDGs, we are lagging behind. And I will also adapt the parang joke ni Yusek Rose Edilion. Hindi lang tayong lagging behind na double G. Lagging behind pa talaga tayo. LAGING. Lagi-lagi. So the Philippines is lagging behind its peers, no? So you can see here in terms of voice and accountability, we ranked 4th, following Singapore. In terms of regulatory quality, we ranked 6th, following Thailand. In government effectiveness, we are number 7, following also Thailand. And also in terms of control of corruption at number 7, also following Thailand. But of course, hindi tayo matitinag. We will do our best. In government, we are adopting best practices to continue to promote public accountability. So we actually have the Philippine identification system that is providing real matching of applicants' civil registry records with PhilSys. Of course, you all know that we want to use the PhilSys to be able to provide, use this as a way of delivering services for peace, diba? And then we also have the electronic LGU or the e-LGU, which is a centralized hub for Filipinos to access LGU services. So this will pertain to application for licenses, local processing, mga registrations. And then we also have one of our best practices. Ito, maraming beses na rin to recognized, no? COA's, this is the Commission on Audit's Citizen Participatory Audit. And as I mentioned earlier, as part of our strategy, we want to expand this even more. Because this is where the citizens actually lead the state, lead in the conduct of the state audits. So this is already a multi-awarded program, and it also serves as a best practice. And we also have the Philippine Open Government Partnership, which is a multi-stakeholder collaboration to achieve open government. And we are already the PHOGP has already crafted its 6th National Action Plan. And I would also like to add as a best practice, we already have the Stakeholders Chamber on the SDGs. So this was recently established in 2022. This is under it was created under the DBCC subcommittee on the SDGs. And I would like to note that this is the first, you can say, platform of engagement directly with the private sector, our CSOs, the academe and other non-government organizations in the achievement, in the promotion of the SDGs. So they are our equal partners in promoting the 2030 agenda. So it is a multi-stakeholder formation, and from there we can also get the inputs of the private sector, of the CSOs, that will help influence policy to help us achieve the SDGs. Because we recognize that government alone cannot do it, no, to accelerate the 2030 agenda, and we need everybody to help us. And so finally, in conclusion, I'd like to emphasize that accountability and participatory governance are fundamental pillars for achieving sustainable development goals. And these play a pivotal role in promoting transparency, reducing corruption, and ensuring effective utilization of resources. And of course, towards achieving our national development goals, we need the collaboration among government institutions, our civil society organizations, the private sector, and the citizens to drive sustainable development initiatives forward. And the challenges must be addressed with strategic interventions for strengthening accountability and participatory governance. Of course, that will include the legal and policy reforms that you are in charge of, no? By passing all of these laws that are responsive to all of these challenges, to all of these needs. And of course, through capacity building, leveraging on technology, and empowering our citizens. And of course, the role of technology cannot be discounted in enhancing all of those. So, and finally, I would like to reiterate that we should all have that commitment, no, to progress and continuous improvement towards our development goals. So I urge everyone in this room to participate in all efforts to strengthen accountability and governance with the ultimate goal of achieving the SDGs and the ambisyon natin 2040 of a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay para sa lahat. Good afternoon to everyone.
Thank you, Attorney Pure, for refreshing us on the SDGs and reminding us of our commitments to contribute to the realization of the SDGs by 2030. Um, the SDG Watch was indeed very interesting. It sort of give us a self-checking of where we are, a preview of how we are faring, how far, how near, pero are we going to meet it or not? Is something that we hope we have been informed this afternoon. Um, so, before we proceed to our next speaker, I will just like to remind our participants that in your table you would find in your copies of the program the QR code. If in the process of listening you're ready to shoot your questions, it's already ready to lead you to the link. And by the way, our lecture series is also streamed live through our Facebook. So I'd also want to invite our FB viewers to enter their questions through the messages there. And our team will try to consolidate and throw this to our resource persons later when we go to the Q&A portion. Okay? So, are we still okay? Yes. I'm tempted to ask if we need a break. Oh, that's louder. So I guess I can declare a 5-minute break. We'll be strict on the time. Our teams will be reminding you to please come back after 5 minutes so you can do some stretching or go some nature break. Okay, 5 minutes? Thank you. Hinahanap. our 5 minutes is actually up. So I hope you can quickly grab whatever is available there at the back. Seems like the afternoon snack. Otherwise, you can request our wait staff to bring them to your table. Pwede, no? So, in the interest of time, and as you are getting your afternoon snacks, please allow me to continue the next part of this lecture series. And we have another resource person to deliver a talk. And we'd like to thank again. We always are accommodated whenever we invite her, and thank you. And we're always grateful and happy to have her in our lecture series. Actually, this is not the first time, and I'd like to introduce our next speaker. She is a professor and former chair of the Department of Political Science, University of the Philippines, Diliman, and currently the editor of the Philippine Political Science Journal, chair of Division 8, which is the Social Sciences of the National Research Council of the Philippines, and member of the Board of Trustees of the Social Weather Stations, Inc., and the Social Sciences and Philosophy Research Foundation. She also served as director of the UP Third World Studies Center from 2010 to 2013, and as president of the Philippine Political Science Association from 2007 to 2009, and co-convener of the program on Social and Political Change UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies from 2018 to 2023. She obtained her Bachelor of Arts, magna cum laude, and masteral degree in 1992 and 1993, both in political science under the honors program from the UP Diliman, executive master's degree in European and International Relations with distinction from the Amsterdam School of International Relations, University of Amsterdam, and PhD in Political Science from the Graduate School of International Cooperation Studies, Kobe University in Japan. So, ladies and gentlemen, our participants, let us warmly welcome Dr. Maria Ella Atienza.
Good afternoon to everyone. I hope gising na kayo. Kahit kumakain, para kasing ballroom yung dating ng yung layout ng ating room, may chandeliers pa, 'di ba? But I hope I can give justice to the task given to me this afternoon, and of course, thank you to the AP CBILLS group for always inviting me. As Ma'am Aimee mentioned, medyo suki na ako ng CBILLS particularly and the AP in general. We have partnered pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, and now post-pandemic in many activities, including the Thursday Talks. And I'm also glad to see a lot of familiar faces, both from the Senate and the House of Representatives from time to time. And we are glad that the academic community is being given a voice and being allowed to be a partner of our Senate committees and our senators, House committees, and our House representatives in trying to think about more empirically based decisions when it comes to new policies, amendments, and review of not just the important Republic Acts, but also the Constitution of the country. So, My task this afternoon is to talk about the global democratic landscape and Philippine political institutions. Of course, as you have heard from Ma'am Aimee, I'm a political scientist by training, and nahalata na yung edad ko kasi nandito ang mga estudyante ko. Ang isa nga ay yung inyong first speaker. Ayan. But at least for this afternoon, ayan, okay. Ayan, nag-work. So for this, for my particular session, the CBILLS program asked me to do several things to help you contextualize the global state of democracy and at least say something about how democratic institutions evolve globally. At the same time, focus, of course, on Philippine political institutions, the current Philippine political system, and discuss possible factors, both external and internal, that might have influenced the shaping of our current institutional framework, and at the same time, look at the strengths and weaknesses of the current political system. And finally, identify opportunities and challenges in the current political landscape that we can learn from in order to strengthen the integrity of democratic governance for sustainable development. So, in terms of outline, I hope I can adequately discuss at least the basic aspects of each of this, given the time available to me. But as a political scientist, and for those with political science background, you know that we usually start with concepts. So I'll start with concepts like governance, inclusive governance, and human rights-based governance for development. Democracy, of course, because we keep repeating democratization and participation. Then focus very briefly on the global state of democracy and where the Philippines is in that global state of democracy. Very briefly discuss the evolution and current state of Philippine political institutions. Provide a very brief analysis of the state of and challenges to Philippine democracy. And in the conclusion, discuss opportunities for strengthening the Philippine political system and institutions for sustainable development. Okay, so let's start with governance. Paulit-ulit tayo gumagamit ng governance, good governance, inclusive governance. Ano ba ibig sabihin nun? Okay? Definitely, it's a broader term than government, but there's no very specific textbook definition of governance. Sa mga familiar kay Haywood, lalong-lalo na yung mga political science majors, actually 5th edition na tong sinasite ko. Baka yung mga naging estudyante ko dito, nasa 2nd or 3rd edition pa yung ginamit nyo. But in general, if we're going to look for a definition of governance, in its widest sense, it refers to the various ways through which social life is coordinated. As Attorney Pure mentioned earlier, government cannot do everything. The national government cannot do everything. So it's only one of the various stakeholders or institutions that can be involved in what we call governance. At the same time also, when we talk about governance, we're talking about the involvement of markets, various hierarchies, as well as various social, political, economic, and social networks. Yeah. Okay. And then, at the same time also, looking at governance, and I think many of you can really grasp this because you know you have to be linking with different groups, different institutions within and outside government. When we talk about governance, we're talking about the blurring of the state-society distinction, resulting from the following changes in how we conduct public administration. These include the development of new forms of public management, the growth of public-private partnerships, the increasing importance of policy networks beyond legislative bodies and committees, as well as the greater impact of both supranational and subnational organizations. Of course, we often claim that the Philippines is a sovereign nation state, but as a sovereign nation state, it is also part of larger groupings, both at the regional and international field. So we are also affected, and we can also take part in many activities of supranational and subnational organizations that we are a member of. When we deal with many issues like sustainable development and the many goals, for instance, of sustainable development like the SDGs, even if we're talking at the national level, we have to talk about multi-level governance. Because it's a complex policy process in which political authority is actually distributed at different levels of territorial organization. And it has both vertical and horizontal dimensions. This multi-level governance has become very important because of the increasing burden on national governments worldwide. At the same time that the national governments are being pressured from above as a member of a larger international community, it's also being pressured from below, not only by local governments, but by various sectors and communities to respond to the needs of the lower level institutions. So we have subnational, local, and transnational levels putting pressure at the national level. So we normally talk about, for instance, localization of international and national laws, agreements, and mechanisms. And that is part of multi-level governance. Okay. Yeah. And in looking at governance, and this is where transparency, accountability, and trust become very prominent. When we look not only in the context of the Philippines, but in terms of how governance has developed in the past decades, governance has actually developed new strategies for participation and governance. And these include joint approaches to planning, changing forms of accountability, third, empowered forms of direct participation, and fourth, strengthening inclusive representation of locally elected bodies. And in this context, as mentioned by the various strategies being pursued both by the national government and NEDA in particular, as mentioned by Attorney Pure, we can see how these global trends in governance are becoming more prominent in many of the provisions of specific laws meant to attain not only sustainable development but also greater democratization and participation. Looking specifically at the 1991 Local Government Code, these four trends can actually be found in many of the provisions of the Local Government Code. And then, in looking at the implementation of these global trends in governance, according to Gaventa, there are key lessons in moving forward when we think about these global trends in governance. Number one, it's important to always think about inclusion and social justice, particularly focusing on the protection and empowerment of marginalized sectors. Second, you have to work on both sides of the equation. On the one hand, it's important to strengthen the capacities of the formal institutions, but at the same time, we also need to encourage the strengthening of the capacities of community organizations as well as citizens to actually participate in governance. Then, it's important to develop and promulgate clear rules and roles of engagement. It's important that different stakeholders understand how they relate with one another and what are their responsibilities as well as rights. Then, it's important to improve incentives for engagement and quality representation. It's also important to name and address power relations. We cannot move forward in inclusive governance and sustainable development if we cannot identify the problems and challenges, in particular, the power relationships that are existing that challenge or actually stop us or prevent us from actually achieving our goals, including, for instance, gender equality, people's participation, making education inclusive and accessible for all, and making justice accessible for all. It's also important to focus on context. Definitely, there are a lot of good practices nationally, locally, and internationally. But we cannot simply replicate all these good practices. It's important to also focus on what is important at the local context and what would actually work. And then, of course, when thinking about good governance, inclusive governance, and participatory governance and sustainable development, definitely the process takes time and it's going to be slow and there could be setbacks along the way. So it's important to actually stay the course if you really want to achieve important targets. Okay, so in terms of looking at governance and development, the intersection of governance and development, particularly democratic governance and development, it's important to highlight the human rights approach. Why is this important? Because according to Sagasti, the achievement of human rights is the objective of any process aimed at improving the human condition. Human rights, in their broadest sense, is the scaffolding of development policy. It invokes the international apparatus of human rights in development action. And if we often hear people say, nakakain ba yung human rights? Bakit ba kayo human rights ng human rights? Actually, pwede nating sabihin, talagang pwede. If we achieve human rights, baka mas maraming sources ng pagkain. Bakit? Kasi when we talk about human rights, we're not only talking about political rights. We're also talking about economic, social, and cultural rights, which are also interrelated with one another. The right to food, the right to healthy food, hindi lang yung when we talk about resilience, kasi after disasters, sasabihin, at least may shelter. Pero hindi yung basta-basta na. Dapat may dignity. Di ba? So those are things na madaling makita, and these are, the bottom line is, they are anchored on human rights approach to democratic governance and development. So when people ask you, pwede bang kainin ang human rights, actually specific human rights activities can actually lead to access to food, better food, more sustainable food, and more locally sourced food. And in the process, human rights thinking can actually lead to more inclusive and more economically advanced sectors in society, including our agricultural sector. And of course, global trends in governance and the human rights approach also includes accountability, empowerment, participation, and non-discrimination. When we look at the human rights approach to governance, it also focuses on the development of adequate laws, policies, institutions, administrative procedures, and practices, as well as mechanisms of redress and accountability that can deliver on entitlements, respond to denial and violations, and ensure accountability. And definitely, this calls for the translation of universal standards into locally determined benchmarks for measuring progress and enhancing accountability. Kaya napaka-importante nung mga, sabi ng iba, ang daming mga indices na ginagawa na kailangan gawin. Bakit kailangan pang mag-develop ng bagong indices? Kasi we constantly need to actually see if the current indices are appropriate for us and locally grounded and culturally grounded. Okay. Definitely, some people would be surprised by linking the human rights approach to democratic governance and development. But in linking the adoption of a rights-based approach to development, it can broaden the concept of governance and make it necessary to add the qualifier democratic for it to actually make sense. And human rights are inextricably linked with democratic governance. Both require that people are aware of their rights and duties. Appropriate institutional arrangements facilitate their realization, and a democratic civic culture have a role in issues of national and everyday importance, and they reinforce each other. Okay. So, in terms of the interlinked processes aimed at reducing exclusion and poverty and advancing a rights-based approach to development, definitely it's important to address economic and political exclusion. So, we cannot separate economic from political exclusion. The legitimization of state institutions and citizen participation aimed at articulating a viable political community with a shared sense of the common good, history, and of the future, and which should lead to representative and efficient state institutions that citizens could identify as their own, are very crucial elements. And these require political and administrative reforms, not only at the national level, but at all levels. Okay, very briefly, when we talk about democracy, it means various things to many people. It can mean a system of rule by the poor and the disadvantaged, a form of government in which the people rule themselves directly and continuously, a society based on equal opportunity and individual merit, a system of welfare and redistribution, a system of decision-making based on the principle of majority rule, a system of rule and that secures the rights and interests of minorities, a means of filling public offices through competitive struggle for the popular vote, and a system of government that serves the interests of the people regardless of their participation in political life. But let me link particularly democracy with getting legitimacy and trust. Democracy can be seen to promote legitimacy in three key ways, and these are actually some of the strategies mentioned earlier being pursued by the Philippine government and NEDA specifically. One is getting consent and participation. Participation binds government and the people, encouraging the latter to view the rules of the political game as rightful and so to accept that they have an obligation to respect and obey those in authority. But at the same time, democracy focuses on compromise, conciliation, and negotiation. Rival interests and groups find a way of living together in relative peace through mechanisms such as elections, assembly debates, party competition, and other processes. And finally, the feedback system, which is still underdeveloped in the Philippines. It brings the outputs of government into line with the inputs or pressures placed upon it. Of course, this reflects the more systems approach to political life. Ay, yaw niya. Ayan. Ayan. Okay. So what is the state of global democracy and what is the status of the Philippines, or what is the position of the Philippines in this state of democracy? In recent years, you will hear the term democratic backsliding. So people are asking, is democracy actually failing to deliver on its promises, or what people expect from democracy? This is based on a number of events that is happening, or processes that are happening not only in the Philippines but in other parts of the world. For instance, a growing number of mature democratic societies like the United States and some of our European friends have been afflicted by a sense of political disenchantment and disaffection with politics and democratic processes. At the same time, new political forces have emerged to threaten or at least sit uneasily with conventional democratic structures. Examples of this include populist parties or factions within existing parties. And third, growing global interdependence are supposed to stimulate debate about whether democracy could operate at a global or cosmopolitan level. This could involve the creation of a world parliament or the reform of international organizations to strengthen global civil society. However, as we are seeing in the United Nations, in ASEAN, and in many organizations, there are numerous barriers to this type of international democracy. Now, there are many indices about democracy globally. There's the VDEM, or Varieties of Democracy, Freedom House, but I can only mention specifically one this afternoon, the International IDEA, or the International Institute for Democracy, Electoral Accountability's Global State of Democracy. So in their latest Global State of Democracy of 2023, this was released late last year, they mentioned that there are many things going on in the post-pandemic world. Particularly in 2023, they mentioned, and I quote, "The global state of democracy is complex, fluid, and unequal." They have noted that across every region of the world, democracy has continued to contract, with declines in at least one indicator of democratic performance in half of the countries covered by the IDEA report. Measured in terms of the areas of improvement and decline within each country, 2022 was the 6th consecutive year in which more countries experienced net declines in democratic processes than net improvements. In short, democracy is still in trouble, stagnant at best, and declining in many places. However, they also noted some positive areas and opportunities, notably in the area of corruption falling and surprisingly high levels of political participation in many countries. So while the Global State of Democracy 2023 shows some decline in countries that has been thought to be healthy democracies, including the Philippines, at the same time, the Global State of Democracy also noted that there were encouraging improvements in countries where the levels of oppression has been constant for years. In particular, the Global State of Democracy 2023 mentioned or focused on the countervailing institutions against democratic erosion and authoritarianism that should be the focus of reforms, strengthening, and capacity building. And this include strengthening human rights organizations, electoral management bodies, civil society networks, popular movements or social movements, and investigative journalists or the media. What can be done to address the threats to democracy, both acute and chronic? The report of 2023 mentions a number of recommendations. One is support for electoral processes, focusing on mechanisms that guarantee fair contests and participation. Number two, transparency and access to information in legislatures that would multiply the source of accountability. Number three, full commitment from governments to protect civic space. And finally, legal protections for the independence of institutions that protect elections, investigate corruption, and supervise government programs. In the Philippines, this refers to the Commission on Human Rights, COA, COMELEC, and all regulatory agencies. In the Asia Pacific, to zero in on the Philippines, the broad democratic decline witnessed in the region in recent years has mostly come to a halt, according to the report. However, factors in the area of civil liberties, such as freedom of expression and freedom of association and assembly, largely continued their multi-year downward trend across the region. After peaking in 2022, the region's aggregate freedom of the press score has now reverted to 2001 levels. Significant declines have occurred in countries as varied as Australia, Kyrgyzstan, the Philippines, South Korea, Sri Lanka, and Taiwan. While the broad democratic decline has ended, there has not been a turnaround. Most countries in the region remain below the global average in every category other than participation. Although significant improvements in rule of law in the Maldives, Taiwan, and Uzbekistan, and representation in Malaysia, Maldives, and Thailand are considered to be promising by the report. Across the region, ineffective parliaments and crackdowns on organized civil society have left the judiciary, anti-corruption commissions, and at times, mass street protests as the key countervailing institutions. To put them in images or in figures, you will see in the slide the net advances and declines in terms of overall stability in democratic performance across Asia and the Pacific. In 2020, where the Philippines was redder, now it's more pink, meaning there is some improvement. We're hoping we'll get to the gray as we continue to work on reforms and strengthening our capacities to strengthen our institutions as well as improve participation and accountability. In terms of freedom of expression, we will see that the Philippines ranks in the middle. Indonesia is even higher than us in terms of freedom of expression. This is average from 2017 to 2022. In terms of freedom of the press, you will see variations in terms of expression and freedom of the press, again from the period of 2017 to 2022, and the Philippines places 5th in comparison with Australia, South Korea, Taiwan, Sri Lanka, and Kyrgyzstan. So at least we're higher than Kyrgyzstan. Okay. And then the final figure from this 2023 Global State of Democracy Report of IDEA, We have seen advances and declines in the absence of corruption in selected countries, again, during the period of 2017 to 2022. In the case of the Philippines, we are still noted as declining. And this actually supports the report of NEDA and the Philippine government that we still have a lot more work to do in the area of corruption. So we're actually, in terms of the index, the Global State of Democracy Index, we are still declining here, and we have to catch up to be able to meet our targets of diminishing corruption and its impact on development and democracy. Okay, in terms of the Philippine political system and institutions, in terms of evolution and development, definitely I will not go here chronologically, but definitely for those who still remember their history, political science, and civics education, you will note that we can trace the current political system from prehistoric times. We have retained, for instance, the barangay as our basic unit of government. And some of the prehistoric or pre-Spanish practices continue to be present up to today. There are definitely different factors affecting the evolution and development of our political institutions. Of course, our history, our evolving culture, our changing society and population, and our economy that is increasingly being open to international and global trends. In terms of external influences, definitely our various colonial experiences under different colonizers have contributed to the shape and evolution of our political system. Our continuing relationship with the outside world and our membership in international institutions, as we see today when we navigate foreign policy relations, our relationship with China, with ASEAN, with the US, these are shaped by our continuous involvement in many global organizations, regional arrangements, and processes, including international mediation, international law, and international courts. Definitely, we have to focus on internal influences. We are not only affected by our structures and institutions. Actors, both individual and as groups, have a way of shaping the trajectory of Philippine politics and our political system. Processes and dynamics continue to affect the shape of our political system and our institutions. So, very briefly, what do we have in terms of our political system and institutions? And what do we need to capacitate and strengthen if we are going to meet our goals of sustainable development and inclusive democracy and development? So, since 1986, the post-EDSA, post-1986 Philippine politics, we have seen, of course, the legacy of people power and the growth of civil society. Until now, despite many attempts of changing it, either amending or completely overhauling the 1987 Constitution, it still stands as our Constitution. It established a unitary but devolved presidential system, liberal institutions with political participation. It also established a multi-party system, but what evolved is a weak party system with weak party discipline and lack of political ideologies and programs. There is too much focus even now, and we will see this, we have seen this in the surveys, in the results of the campaign, focus more on the personalities rather than the party programs and ideologies. There's also a return of old elite families and the emergence of new political families as a result of 1986 and people power. The electoral system still favors personality-oriented politics. We continue to have the first past the post system with a very strange version of proportional representation, which is the party list system, which was originally supposed to be a venue for our marginalized sectors to use for representation, but has now been captured by elites and traditional politicians. Okay. At the same time, we also note in many analyses of political scientists a strengthened Supreme Court, but it's still heavily politicized and threatened by the two other branches. The armed forces, despite efforts to professionalize, continue to be politicized to a certain extent, but we do have, in terms of positive areas, the 1991 Local Government Code and the ongoing devolution, the creation of the autonomous government in Muslim Mindanao from ARRM to BARM. We have seen successes in the peace process, of course, more successful in dealing with, the Philippine government has been more successful in dealing with Muslim secessionism than the communist insurgency. We have been integrated more greatly into the world market, but we have seen a growing economy amidst inequality. Of course, as I mentioned last time, earlier, there are already various attempts to revise and amend the 1987 Constitution, but until now, the 1987 Constitution remains to be intact, although talks are still ongoing, attempts to revise provisions are ongoing. We still see weak basic services and substantial people's participation. At the same time, because of the weak basic services, we see sometimes the disenchantment of a lot of people when it comes to how they perceive our political system and our liberal democratic institutions. At the same time, many of the substantive goals of the 1987 Constitution, including people's participation, inclusive democracy, and partnership with civil society, remain to be non-implemented or at least partially implemented. We are also seeing, in certain instances in our recent history, the rise of populism and polarization, but at the same time, rising discontent on the part of the people, and at the same time, various reform initiatives. In terms of, looking at the state of and challenges of Philippine democracy, the Philippines is considered mid-range performing presidential democracy based on many analyses. Over the last 5 years, there have been notable declines in civil liberties and checks on government due to the phenomenon such as police violence and the suppression of the freedom of expression. At the same time, there are also nascent signals of the opening of the democratic space, particularly since 2022. International IDEA noted that it's important to watch constantly civil liberties and checks on government in the years ahead, especially in relation to media freedom and justice for past regimes violations. And we are seeing this in terms of our investigations and the role of the ICC and international organizations in the area of human rights. Many aspects of democracy may also be impacted by the new law on Bangsamoro, which grants increased autonomy to the region. Fundamental rights and other aspects of democracy may also be affected by proposed but controversial constitutional reform. The government's commitment to fighting corruption will also impact impartial administration. Opportunities for improvement will depend on the level of transparency and access to information and education on the legacy of political dynasties for younger generations of Filipinos. I don't have time to discuss our work on constitutional performance assessment of the 1987 Philippine Constitution, but you can check you can easily see the links. You can check out these two works which came out in 2020, supported by International IDEA. This was made by, this is a qualitative assessment of the constitutional performance assessment of the 1987 Philippine Constitution, made by a group of political scientists, including myself. According to International IDEA, they are not yet renewing our grant to do another report because they said our report is still relevant and valid, our analysis, and they said based on the downloads, these two publications are still the among the two most downloaded products of International IDEA. But I think one thing that I need to mention here is that while the general framework of reviewing constitutional performance was provided by International IDEA, they allowed us actually to put indicators that are Philippine-based and what Filipinos think would be important in assessing the 1987 Constitution. So in that sense, while this is qualitative, this can also be the basis of more quantitative indices in the future that will focus on a number of aspects of constitutional performance, including inclusive governance and sustainable development. Just very briefly, what are the institutional design areas that we look at? We look at electoral institutions, legislative, executive relations, the judiciary, accountability institutions, local governments, rights, the security sector, economy and labor, citizenship, and equality. In terms of, very briefly, our pre-pandemic assessment of Philippine politics and democracy, in terms of internal criteria, whether the Constitution was able to follow many of the provisions and institutions set up, we found out that there is only thin compliance with internal criteria used in performance assessment. This means that many of the technical requirements in the Constitution have been met in terms of setting up many mandated institutions, holding processes such as elections and enacting necessary laws and actions. However, what we call thick or substantial compliance in terms of meeting the goals set in the Constitution is still one thing. Furthermore, some laws mandated by the Constitution, including the anti-dynasty provision, have not yet been enacted. We also noted executive dominance despite the provision on checks and balances and separation of powers, as well as the non-inclusion of many sectors in major decision-making. In terms of external criteria, although notable progress has been made, there is still limited or thin compliance in terms of promoting substantive democratization, decentralization, social justice, human rights and gender equality, peace and conflict resolution, and economic development. Immediately after we published this in 2020, the pandemic happened. So they asked us during the pandemic whether we can update our assessment. And this is what we found out. Areas that we have already identified as problematic in the original assessment are continuing to be problematic. And even areas where positive performance was recognized in the assessment are being challenged as a result of the pandemic. But despite these challenges, Some positive innovations were noted in the area of the judiciary, local governments, and citizenship areas that could provide inspiration for more institutional policies and programs that could improve performance on key goals of the Constitution, such as decentralization and autonomy, as well as social justice and inclusive development. So in terms of recommendation, we recommended that it is still possible in the short term to focus on the passage of necessary laws, amendments of existing laws, and administrative reforms in specific agencies, and stricter implementation of laws already in place to achieve many goals of the 1987 Constitution. Since we produced this before the 2022 elections, we noted that reviewing the Constitution and possible amendments can still be pursued after the 2022 elections, but it has to be grounded on genuine and inclusive consultations, people's inputs, and experiences. And aside from legal and administrative reforms, there should also be focus on strengthening democratic actors, groups, processes, and practices. Facts-based decision-making, transparency and accountability, and civic education are a must. In terms of opportunities for strengthening the Philippine political system and institutions for sustainable development, and opportunity structures are very important for us political scientists. There are actually, despite many of the challenges and despite the declining marks in the area of democracy and development, or still failing or conditional marks, parang some are 4, some are 3, if you follow the UP grading system, pabaligtad pagka hindi UP, di ba sa iba kasi 5 yung excellent or 4. But in UP kasi 1 is the excellent. So, ang parang grade natin madalas ay 3, 4, or 5 in many of the indices of democracy. But there are definitely areas that we can pursue. We still have a strong legal framework, starting with the Constitution supporting inclusive democracy. We still have a relatively strong and resilient civil society and movements. We have an embattled but still surviving media groups and practitioners championing fact-checking and empirical-based institutions. We have a lot of progressive best practices local governments, a judiciary which may still be politicized and threatened, but fighting for reforms and rule of law, and reform-minded Filipinos like yourself in government, and others outside government that can partner in pushing for more substantive democracy and inclusive and sustainable development. The achievement of sustainable development will be useless without institutional reforms, capacity building, and resources that would reach the grassroots and ensure their participation, empowerment, and inclusion in all aspects of achieving development. Sustainable development cannot be achieved without genuine empowerment of people on the ground. Okay, salamat po.
Thank you, Dr. Ella. If okay, I will not go back to the podium because at this point, we will enjoy our new couch and proceed now to the question and answer portion. Okay? So, I hope we can still be seen, no? Kahit na we're seated here kasi kailangan natin gamitin yung ating couch. Okay. So, let's proceed to our open forum for questions. That was quite interesting, no? To hear where we are in the SDGs for particular outcome areas, no? And of course, we do also have pala assessments in terms of our constitutional performance, provisions in our Constitution. So, again, it highlights yung mga figures or our standing or the use of indices of how we are faring. And we hope that somehow that is providing us insights, no? And would trigger questions, no? So I open the floor to questions for our resource persons. You may say to whom the question is directed to, but please introduce yourselves first before you throw your question. I'd like to ask the floor first. I'm not sure if every table has a microphone, but we do have a microphone ready there. So whoever is ready to give their question may just approach our microphone. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I'm Maria Cristina Pardalis from the Senate Economic Planning Office. My question is for Attorney Reverie, and my second question is for both of you. Ma'am, I did not hear or probably just missed it earlier, but what are our existing strategies and proposed measures in terms of improving our people's access to justice, which you mentioned earlier as an SDG 16 indicator where there is a marked deterioration? And also, I looked up our score in control of corruption before 2019, and in 2015 and 2017, we're already at 39, and now we're down to 33, despite our anti-corruption efforts. So what are we doing wrong? And would you say that our people's seeming tolerance and perception of inevitability of corruption contribute to its prevalence, and how do we address this? Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Pure? Oh, that's quite a lot.
Yeah, just repeat the second question, please. Sorry.
Yeah, I think
that we
the
can-
question pertains
I can-
to our ranking. Bakit bumababa? Kasi she backtracked. What we've shared is 2019 to 2020, more recently. But we do know that the WGI, we've been tracking this for a long time. So she tried to backtrack. So she's curious, what could be the reason why bumababa pa? Would you have answers or some guesses?
I'll answer the first question muna. I
Okay.
think the first question that you posed for me was on the justice, no, on justice. I actually did not include it in my presentation earlier, but strategies on justice are found in Chapter 13.2 of the Philippine Development Plan. So in particular, we have the following specific strategies to ensure that there is swift administration of justice and we can ensure the rule of law. So this would include, among others, the establishment of more justice zones. So actually, there are justice zones and justice hubs that serve as one-stop venues for justice sector actors to administer the criminal justice system. So that's the first one. And then there's also the strategy on strengthening further the prosecution and case build-up. And of course, that will entail capacity building also and ensuring very specific policies on data and evidence gathering. And of course, in case build-up, you also need the interagency coordination, starting from the police investigators that respond to the scene of the crime. We have our prosecutors all the way up to our trial courts. There's also the strategy on the use of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, or ADR, and of course the broader engagement of the public and the private sector in improving access to justice. The PDP also identifies fostering collaboration and cooperation among the different government units for legal assistance, and the transferring of more PDLs, persons deprived of liberty, to various penal facilities outside Metro Manila. So those are the PDP strategies for justice.
Yeah, thank you. So most of the answers go to the PDP relevant chapter. Naku, hindi yata
The
pa
NEDA
nila.
Bible.
Yeah, the NEDA Bible. Alam nila even
Should be
nakapikit.
our socioeconomic blueprint for everybody and the
Yeah.
guide even for Congress.
So, the question on the control of corruption index, is that for Dr. Ella?
They said both. But
Okay,
maybe
both. Okay.
yeah, some of the factors that can contribute to our lowering scores, kasi there are different indices. Some indices actually rely on expert scoring. And even if some of the indices can be named as, let's say, Freedom House, Varieties of Democracy, or International IDEA Global Index of Democracy, these are indicators that are constantly in flux. Every year they change, and actually sometimes they, or most of the time and increasingly, they are involving local academics, and at the same time, our survey groups to actually conduct surveys of people on the ground on these various indices. And some of the reasons, of course, whether it can whether the index is based on expert scoring or surveys of people's perceptions, definitely the scores are affected not just by empirical assessments of the number of, let's say, corruption cases available. Of course, experts definitely have more access to data like cases in the Sandigan Bayan or agencies that have been flagged by COA compared to people's perceptions as reflected in surveys. But at the same time also, the scoring is also based on reporting of media and the kind of sensationalized issues related with corruption, particularly if they affect, let's say, the economy, money that should be given to people to help them in their livelihood, or during the pandemic, of course, money that should have been spent for pandemic response. So these are not the complete set of possible factors that can affect the lowering of scores, but they have a way of affecting the responses not only of experts who provide scores, but also those who participate in surveys. And regarding the first question on suggestions on improving access to justice, when you look at the two reports that we made for International IDEA, you will see some suggestions there. Some are actually coming from judges, prosecutors, and other groups that we interviewed who suggested ways of addressing access to justice issues, including the use of the local language in courts, at the same time also increasing the number of support systems, interpreters, as well as facilities for people with disabilities and people, of course, people who belong to marginalized sectors to have better access, and so that it makes transactions a lot easier. Of course, there are suggestions regarding adding more courts, adding more resources, and more capacity building. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon po. I'm Didet Urbano from LBRMO. Since this question is for Director Reverie, Ma'am, since we are from the Appropriation and Finance Committees of Congress, may I ask how well entrenched is participatory governance in our budget cycle today? Because the PDP states that there should be participatory, the CSO, civil society organization participation in the budget cycle, and that this should be implemented by the DBM. I was wondering if how strong is the participation of CSOs in the government in the budget cycle today, because before, during the term of the late President Noynoy Aquino, we had what is called these budget partnership agreements, whereby agencies participated with CSOs in crafting the budget, and we also had the bottom-up budgeting. But if I'm not mistaken, we don't implement this anymore. And also, I have another question for Dr. Ella. Ma'am, what is your take on the anti-dynasty law? Because recently, a group of lawyers, I think from UP, asked the Supreme Court to compel the legislature to enact a anti-dynasty bill. So can the Supreme Court or the judiciary force Congress to ban political dynasties?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm not privy to the answer on the extent of citizen participation or citizen engagement in the budgeting process, because that's really up to DBM as our, the agency that's whose mandate is on preparing our budget, no. But we don't do the bottoms-up budgeting anymore because we're already on the cash-based budgeting. And as you noted, one of our legislative agenda is having a law on cash-based budgeting. So that is one that is being led also by the DBM. But although I may not provide the exact extent of citizen participation in on the budgeting process or the budgeting exercise, what we do know is that when we formulate policies and programs, there is always consultation with the citizenry and the relevant sectors. And when we do that, when there is consultation for policy formulation and all forms of decision making, we can, to a certain extent, ensure that the programs, the activities, the projects that we will implement are actually responsive to the needs and the insights actually that we gained during this consultation. And after all, during the budget cycle, what we found are these projects, activities, and programs that are intended to deliver basic services. So we can say to an extent that we observe citizen consultation. There is engagement of our citizenry in terms of inputting into what should be allocated. But of course, the exact extent and what specific activities, what initiatives that are being undertaken to ensure this is really the jurisdiction of the DBM.
Thank you, Attorney Pure. Next question on the anti-dynasty.
Yeah. Sometimes we forget that the Supreme Court or the courts can actually make law. Because we always assume the two branches, the two houses of Congress will make the law, the executive will implement, and the judiciary will simply declare if something is unconstitutional or not. But actually, the Supreme Court can be very powerful and can actually make legislation. And one important role it did in the party list law is actually to declare that any group can be a party list. It need not be a marginalized sector. So that changed the intention of the law. So in this case, anti-dynasty provision, can the Supreme Court compel Congress to actually enact a law on anti-dynasties? The unfortunate thing is, unlike in the US or in other countries where the study of the Supreme Court is so robust, even among political scientists, not just legal scholars, it's very difficult to actually study the Supreme Court in the Philippines. But from time to time, the Supreme Court can surprise us. Sometimes we expect it to be timid, but it has become very progressive when it came to environmental legislation. And then after more than 30 years, it had the Mandanas-Garcia ruling, which actually changed the nature or the source of the transfers that can be given to local governments from the national government. So in this case, it's possible that they can compel, depending if they can get the numbers. But it's difficult to actually predict the voting of our Supreme Court justices, because unlike in the US where they are partisan, they are chosen based on their ideologies, and it depends if they are more pro-Republican or they're a Republican appointee or they're a conservative appointee. In the case of the Philippines, it's more complex. They're not appointed based on parties, but more on other things or other bases. So, but the thing is, well, it's possible. Yeah, the Supreme Court can actually decide to compel the legislature to enact that law. Although we already did that in the area of the Sangguniang Kabataan, people did not realize that there's a provision there which is actually anti-political dynasty in the SK law. So nakasingit at the local level. Pagka pala nasa local level, hindi napapansin. Pagka national, napapansin kasi lahat. But perhaps that's something for people. Ito naman sa taas, start with the Supreme Court. So let's see if they can compel Congress, if they have the numbers to compel Congress to pass the anti-dynasty provision.
Okay. I also have questions from our Google Sheet. And kung wala pang ready to ask from the floor, I'll ask a question in behalf of our participant, Jay, from the Senate, really for Dr. Ella, for grounding the question on the democratic deficits of the Philippines as found in the presented study. What has been the track record of other fragile democracies across the globe in changing their constitution? So that's the first one. What needs to happen for charter change to be a force for good in the context of a country with declining civil liberties and checks on government? So, two related questions.
Okay, thank you, Jay, for your questions regarding constitutional change. In terms of other countries' experiences, fragile democracies' experiences with changing the constitution, there are attempts in some Latin American countries like Chile and Brazil to change their constitutions, but they have not been very successful. But perhaps one thing that they are doing that we have not yet done is to actually start with engagement with the people, asking people first about what they think about this, what should be changed in the Constitution. Actually, in the late 1960s, before the Constitutional Convention was convened, there were actually attempts in the Philippines to ask people what they think about the 1935 Constitution, and there were already some documented suggestions which actually found their way in some of the changes made in the what eventually became the 1973 Constitution. But of course, unfortunately, it became the provisions that we often focus on, of course, were those that empower the martial law administration. What are the prospects for constitutional change in the Philippines? There are definitely some areas, even our constitutional, the CONCOM members point out that there are certain areas that need to be changed, but we have to start with engaging the people first and have a genuine discussion about the Constitution. If we look at the, since 2016, with federalism and now with possible changes in the economic provisions, the surveys of people would say that people do not want, more people do not want changes in the Constitution. Why? Maybe we should ask them what prevents them from actually, are they afraid? Some people, some scholars hypothesize that this is because they actually distrust politicians, because when they think of charter change, immediately it means lengthening the terms of office. So it's for vested interest. Is that correct? And then the surveys also support a consistent fact that only 1 out of 4 of those who participated in the surveys would confidently say that they actually know what is written in the 1987 Constitution. So failure ng civic education yan. So how can we talk about changing the Constitution if the people who are supposed to actually vote and affirm whether we are changing the Constitution or not, or specific provisions, actually do not know what they are voting for or voting against?
Okay. So, Dr. Ella, if okay, there's another question for you, and it's related to the global democratic landscape that you've shared. This question was from Kim Uy from the House of Rep. You know him.
Kim is here. Where is Kim? There.
Maybe Dr. Ella wants to hear your voice. But I'll read your question anyway. A great blow to the fallibility of democracy, particularly for developing nations, was most prominent during the pandemic, when people realized that political participation does not really guarantee that food will be available on the table. That on a worst-case scenario, it is really every man for himself. So the question was this a global trend or only in the Philippines? And a follow-up question, how is it possible that Kazakhstan, a civilian dictatorship, gets an inclining democratic score, but ours is on a decline trend?
Okay, thank you, Kim, for your questions. I would rather listen to your voice.
Can you wave, Kim, from
Nandun po
there?
siya sa likod. Okay. First, yung first question, these are very important questions. Is it a global trend that people realize that no amount of political participation guarantees that food will be available on the table? Even before the pandemic, there was already a notable decline in terms of people's trust in democratic institutions, as shown in the rise of populist and right-wing political parties, even in developed countries like the US, even in, right-wing political parties are rising in Italy. The Prime Minister now is from a right-wing political party. So there was already that disenchantment with conventional democratic institutions. Initially, during the first months of the pandemic, there was an observation that perhaps more centralized and more authoritarian governments are probably doing it better because it was easier to mobilize people. But later, when the pandemic lingered for years and not in months, later on, the more devolved, decentralized more democratic systems and with high levels of political participation and civic education, and civic participation actually proved to be more resilient. So in the process, I think in the Philippines, the disenchantment is not so much in terms of having formal democratic institutions. It's more in terms of whether there was really respect for inclusive planning and inclusive responses to the pandemic and the economic, social, and political repercussions. Kasi nga parang ang nangyari, ang medyo katulad ng Pilipinas sa response, yung Indonesia and Thailand, mas nag-rely on more militaristic, more security. Di ba, pasaway, sinisipa tayo. Tayo yung makulit. Dapat makinig na lang tayo instead of focusing on how do we encourage people like the community pantries to actually contribute to dealing with the problems. Later lang nagkaroon ng return to, okay, let's allow local governments to be more creative and deal with what would work. And some local governments started partnering with civil society organizations and community pantries to actually help in the delivery and the response to the pandemic. Kazakhstan, how is it possible that a civilian dictatorship has an inclining democratic score while PH is on the decline? Perhaps in terms of, I'm not an expert on Kazakhstan. I have not studied it very much, but offhand I can say that perhaps it's because of political culture and history. There's a tendency to, as long as it works and basic services are delivered, then there's higher satisfaction among the people. Unlike in the Philippines, of course, we relate democratic ideals and democratic institutions to delivery of services and, of course, making sure that promises are kept. But I'm not, some people say we're not actually following up whether promises are kept. We have to do more research on this. But I think, yeah, political values and culture can affect one's trust or level of legitimacy being given to their respective governments, despite the absence of, let's say, elections and actual people's participation.
Thank you. So let me check again the floor. Okay, I see a raise of hand at the back. We have two. That's Christine, I thought. Gentleman from my right side.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. And this is Ramon Torres from the 1st District of La Union, Chief of Staff of Kong Paulo Ortega. I'd like to ask, of course, yung dati kong colleague sa NEDA, attorney. I used to work with NEDA for 18 years before I was uprooted. Tanong ko lang, how important is SDG in Philippine development? I ask that because remember when we had MDGs, we did not also achieve our goals in the MDGs. Pero may empirical study ba that our non-meeting of MDGs affected the development that we have or that we want. So in the same manner, now that we're also looking at a very bleak situation of our SDGs commitment, do we think it will affect our development that we want?
Okay, thank you, to my NEDAN colleague putting me on the spot. So, on the importance of the SDGs, yes, very much so. Dati yung precursor niya MDG, tapos it was expanded, no? So after that period niya, naging SDGs na siya. So, well, it's very important and through the Philippine Development Plan, we already recognized the alignment of our own national priority goals with the SDGs. Because after all, our ambition natin of a matatag, maginhawa, panatag na buhay, pareho lang yun eh. Sustainable development. And at the heart of the SDG is actually leaving no one behind. And that is what we want for every Filipino, especially the vulnerable, the marginalized, really those in poverty, that they will not be left behind, na pati sila aangat yung buhay. So in terms of importance, very much so, and we have already seen this in the 2 PDPs. We started in 2017 when we mainstreamed the SDGs into the Philippine Development Plan. And this we have continued to do this across administration. So now we also have the SDGs in our Philippine Development Plan. Although, as I said earlier, not all the SDGs are in the PDP because, as I also said, the mark of this PDP is really deep economic transformation for a resilient Philippines. And we want to have jobs, more jobs, quality jobs, and green jobs for all Filipinos. That's why we also were very critical also of the SDGs that were put or mainstreamed into the PDP itself. But this does not mean that we do not continue to monitor because the PSA, as I also said earlier, the Philippines is monitoring and has committed to monitor 157 SDG indicators. So by that commitment alone, this should be, of course, coupled with attended by action. So by all the national government agencies where we are sourcing the data from. So dapat nandun din yung commitment to continue to deliver because those indicators have implementing agencies, responsible agencies for the Philippines to meet all our targets. So dapat these are all translated into action, into PAPs. So that's that for the importance and the relevance, the continuing relevance of the SDGs.
Thank you, Attorney Pure. So alignment is very important, and yeah, like she said, it's embedded already in our PDP, and our PDP since the time of its alignment, ito na yung second administration until we reach the 2040. I really like the way that we have
Lagpas
tried
pa nga
to...
tayo sa 2030 agenda eh. 2040 na tayo.
2040, yeah. It's really good that we have this blueprint, blueprint, because it tells us or guides us our direction, no, and story towards development and achieving 2040. Okay, thank you for that. So I'll read one question from our Google Sheet. And this is again for Attorney Pure, going back to SDGs. And I find this question very interesting from Mr. Abel Langke of the Senate. So, citizen empowerment and access to information are indispensable parts of participatory governance. However, gains are easily negated by disinformation campaigns that serves to either mislead citizens with wrong information or at least muddle up the conversations with noise. Has there been any serious discussions among SDG stakeholders to address disinformation campaigns, which I'm sure everyone has experienced and can relate to?
Actually, wala akong na-encounter even in the PDP na very specific strategy, no. But we know that we're all faced with this problem, and I think it's on the bottom line is it's incumbent upon every agency to put out the correct information to battle disinformation, and I think it's about time also for government, no, to scale up its initiatives to combat disinformation. But syempre, this will entail also budget and all that so that there's really that information campaign, public awareness, kasama na rin po yung civic education. Sabi nga ni Professor Ella, na parang there is really low public awareness, even about the Constitution itself. So there is a lot that parang there's a lot to address even at that level yung citizens natin na there should really be that public awareness and should be actually part na rin ng dapat ginagawa ng ahensya to bring out the public the correct information. Actually, every agency, we all have our own communication strategy, di ba? We are all, actually, we have our platforms in Facebook, in Twitter, and this should be used, I think, taken advantage of more fully to put out correct information. I think that's really one thing po, to take advantage of all these digital platforms to address that. Although I don't know if we are really scaling up our efforts to combat all of this. So, yun po.
I think very limited, if I may, because one time when we went to listen to the experience of Korea, some of those people who were with us when we were in Korea, hearing the efforts of the government, is that they have very high consciousness on the disinformation, and so they are trying to address this right by saying that we need to educate our public kasi they're very prone to this mga fake news, no? Fake news and all those sorts of things that we encounter because of the profile, especially in the Philippines, our access to mobile phones, almost, everyone. So, the more access to information, actually, may corresponding, vulnerabilities to fake news and nadi-disadvantage yung ating public.
I think also, ma'am, if I may add, yung natin, syempre, maybe Prof. Ella will correct me if I'm wrong. Pero di ba we also pride ourselves, we have a vibrant democracy. So we really uphold, we put prime importance on the freedom of expression. Although Professor Ella has already mentioned that it has also seen some form of decline. But the Philippines is known for having yung really that ability to be able to express ourselves. So sometimes I think there should be a balance between the kind of information that is put out there and the social responsibility of people, and how do we hold them accountable. Maybe it's also up for our colleagues in Congress to consider, do we have the legal framework to actually hold citizens accountable for misinformation, disinformation that is put out for public consumption. Because government alone, we just work within the current legal framework, whatever it is that we have, and we put out also the correct, what appropriate policies. But of course, the enabling law comes from Congress. So we might also want to look into that and how we can put that, we can strike that balance between regulating misinformation, disinformation, and at the same time, respecting and upholding people's right to freedom of expression.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Panganiban, sir.
For attorney, I do recognize and appreciate the efforts of the government to identify the 157 indicators in the SDG. But in your presentation earlier, I noted that some of the indicators don't have national targets. Well, from the management point of view, parang hindi ko ma-appreciate yung yung actual performance if we just have the indicator without the target, because we're not really establishing where we are relative to the target that we want, given that we have SDGs. Also, there is, if I remember correctly, doon sa summary merong mga hindi solid lines kasi there's lack of information, statistics. Ang question ko is, who's responsible in setting the national targets? And bakit hanggang ngayon walang national targets? And while it is good na yung bawat isang indicator ay may naka-assign na agency to look into it, but without the target, hindi magiging malinaw yung action ng concerned agency?
Sir, tama po yun, no? Those are really valid concerns. NEDA, in consultation with different government agencies, we come up, also with the assistance of the PSA, we come up with the targets. And as I said earlier, in 2019, we actually updated the targets. And based on all the series of workshops, yun nga po, no, we recognize that there are still indicators wherein we don't have targets. It's also due to a variety of reasons. Some we feel some indicators, because as you all know, this is a UN diba? The UN SDGs is really a UN agenda, no? That is but we have all, as part of the UN community, become also made this a part of our own national priorities, part of parang the law of the land, no? Our as part of the international community. And we note that some of these indicators are not applicable to us. And that is also one of the reasons why for some indicators where we feel that these are not really appropriate to the Philippine context, that we have opted not to provide targets. And for others, there is as yet no appropriate, and for that reason, there's no appropriate agency that will actually be able to collect the data and provide the data for these indicators. And if you recall, when I mentioned that there are actually supplemental indicators wherein we actually have targets. This is but when we report to the UN, we can only report on those global indicators. But for our Philippine context, we actually adopted some proxy indicators and even supplemental indicators, which we use for our purpose because they are appropriate for us, relevant to us, and consider the Philippine context. But for purposes of reporting to the UN, these are not, hindi siya kasi yung accepted na report. So we only report on those 157 global indicators. But for the others that we have determined for ourselves, meron naman po. So I hope that also allays some of your concerns on the indicators. Did I miss pa ba? May question?
Yeah, more on the data si Sir interested.
Yung sa data din po, yung there are those that are solid red blocks and blue. So these are actually monitored by our PSA. And there are tier 1 indicators wherein we have the complete, there's regularity, there's established methodology. So those indicators, when we have those, they form part of the tier 1 indicators because we are sure that we can regularly collect the data. There are also tier 2, tier 3 indicators. Yung iba, for tier 2, parang we just have the methodology. So for now, what we're trying to do for those that we have insufficient data, PSA is working on currently on the methodology so that we can generate the data. So the effort to be able to generate the data is ongoing. So, yun po.
So maybe I can just build on this one question related to about the data on the SDG asked by our director, Gilbert Lumantao. So with the observations that it seems we don't have enough data, or whether we're performing well or even regressing, maybe because we don't have targets, or for some it's difficult to gather. Would you think there would be legislation, or what legislation or resources may be needed to be able to produce at least the necessary data on the SDGs?
Siguro po increase in allocation para kay PSA kasi sila yung
For PSA?
Yeah, because they need syempre to collect data.
Yeah.
Marami yun eh, yung mga ano ba nila, the enumerators,
Yeah.
all those going to that.
To deploy.
So to deploy, no? So maraming perang kailangan. So so budget appropriation siguro yung pinakauna na instead of decreasing, dapat increasing.
Yeah, okay. They
Di ba,
hear
ma'am?
you. Andirito sila.
Salamat.
Okay. Sige. Anyone else from the floor? We have some time left. I have several questions here, but I will just be choosing yung ano kasi medyo dumami. But okay. I'll choose some for our ending question, but this one is very specific as this is one of the legislative agenda mentioned in Chapter 14. So, I'm not sure if Attorney Pierre can answer because the question is from Lucia. Lucy, ikaw ba to from the Senate? Is the current DBM National Government Right-Sizing Program only intended for the executive branch of the government? Ay, hindi niya alam. Kasi hindi niya alam.
Ano ba yung nasa right sizing
Hindi
bill?
ba nasa draft?
Oo. Ano ba yung nasa draft
Meron
bill?
ba
I'm not seeing
nakakaalam
it.
who may be able to...
Baka kayo yung nakakaalam. Nandyan sa inyo yung draft.
Okay, sige. Okay, puro ano, I think talagang nag-gain ng so much interest yung seeing the indicators, no? So we have here another question related to index on corruption. And this question came from Director Jocelyn Lim from the House of Rep. What is your take with regards to corruption on the implementation of infra projects? Did it decline or increase? How would you relate this to the Build program of this administration? I think we can get answers from both our resource person.
The corruption's perception index is a perception-based
Yeah,
index siya.
perception-based.
It's like the perception of the citizen to the extent that private sector has captured the public government and incidents of petty and large-scale corruption. But there's no specific mention on infrastructure kasi it's that general perception of the citizenry as to the prevalence of corruption. So I suppose, since it's perception-based, and if people see, as I said earlier, di ba, maliit nga lang na issue na petty corruption, it erodes decades worth of work combating corruption. So, when we read in the newspapers, anything that is irregular in procurement, of course, it impacts greatly on the public perception on government's diba, efficiency, yung transparency and accountability. So, it will negatively impact once, syempre, magsa-survey. It will be reflected in the survey naturally. So, even if I don't know the exact kung anong infra project, it's parang human nature. It will translate into our perception. We'll think that the whole government is corrupt when only it's just one agency or it was just one incident or sometimes we don't even know what really happened, but they're already, the imputation is a corruption yan. No? So we can see it right away in the Corruptions Perception Index.
Dr. Ella?
I think, yeah, as a continuation of what I mentioned earlier when it comes to corruption, definitely perception plays a role, and media coverage of corruption cases or instances of corruption play a role in one's perception about the extent of corruption happening. But one way of possibly combating that is coming up with more empirically based indices. But of course, this will be based on what has been reported. Of course, well, at least that's empirical, but not, of course, not all cases get reported or there are cases filed. But at least that's a good starting point to counterbalance the perceptions about corruption, which may not actually capture the actual extent of corruption. So maybe if we can get the support, if there's an interagency group in charge of really tracking corruption, then perhaps COA, the Sandigan Bayan can cooperate and look at the cases of corruption depending on various classifications. So infrastructure projects involved in the Build program. Other categories would be in terms of procurement, for instance, supplies, particularly the medicines and anti-COVID supplies during the pandemic.
Meron naman in place, di ba, we have the Citizens Participatory Audit. So nakikita din naman nila yan. So siguro dapat i-publish din kung ano yung nakasulat doon, no? Kasi part yun naman ng COA na what they're doing. So maybe if there are good findings there, baka that's one way of combating the perception that government is just reeking with corruption, di ba? So, but we can also make use of that. But there's a strategy, there's a mechanism in place to also combat that and bringing in citizens to participate in that audit.
Yeah, I think we have a long way to go pa changing the public perception and building trust on government in many ways, in many processes. But we're doing something, no, about it. Okay, so I'll ask if okay, kung walang gusto magtanong sa floor, I'll ask two questions. One, the only one from Facebook. I think I should ask this, and this is for Dr. Ella. And from Miss Ruby Manganti, she's asking, how does this present government deal with the so-called democratic backsliding, especially in administering our sovereignty over West Philippine Sea? Okay, medyo na tayo. Sige.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Ruby, for the question. Hindi ako foreign policy or IR expert. I'm more comparative politics specialist. But in terms of the West Philippine Sea issue, I think an important aspect of transparency and accountability would be to actually investigate whether there really was this so-called gentleman's agreement, and then at the same time also, of course, without revealing the more strategic, kasi syempre sa military at saka sa mga security alliances, may mga ibang bagay na hindi mo pwedeng sabihin in public, particularly the position of our allies, kasi syempre pagka narinig ng iba, baka maging gamitin nila to their advantage. Pero at least yung mga accountability, reporting to the public, of course, what are the agreements we had or the agreements that we are planning with our allies. Kasi ang daming nangyayari ngayon. May shift talaga, pagbabago sa foreign policy focus compared to the previous administration. Maraming mga kaya, syempre, kasama na rin doon, ano ba resulta nito? Siguro, beyond the West Philippine Sea, ano yung resulta ng mga biyahe? Kasi gumagastos din tayo doon. Kahit sabihin na invited tayo na ginagastosan tayo ng mga nag-imbita sa atin, syempre may ginagastos din tayo. So magkano rin ang ginagastos doon? Anong investments ang mga nakuha natin? And anong mga agreements in relation to security, in relation with economic agreements, mga even socio-cultural agreements. So doon papasok yung accountability and transparency. Kasi kailangan din siguro kasi medyo mahina yung may mga watchdogs tayo sa local governments, may mga watchdogs tayo at the national level, pero baka pagdating sa foreign policy, syempre it takes more resources kung civil society watchdog kayo or or perhaps media, but it can also be the subject of investigative reports din, itong mga security agreements, foreign policy agreements involving the West Philippine Sea or other security arrangements that we will have. Halimbawa, yung mga EDCA sites, medyo rin yan, may impact kasi yan sa mga local governments na mag-host ng mga EDCA sites may mga fears, baka daw parang bumalik yung panahon na may Clark and Subic, yung mga negative impacts na may mga foreign troops tayo, lalong-lalo na American troops. So, of course, hindi naman pwedeng sabihin lahat yung size nila, pero at least yung extent and hanggang saan sila. Kasi may mga, rin yan, mga social cost din and cultural cost na pwedeng mangyari. And we need to also report what we see. Both civil society, media, and even academics doing research in these areas.
Okay, thank you. So, Attorney Pure, maybe to concretize, there's a question here on, of course, we've mentioned the importance of collaboration in strengthening public accountability and participatory governance. Ms. Maria Helena De Gala from the Senate is asking, if you could share an instance of collaboration, a concrete example among government, civil society, and private sector aimed at promoting the goals under SDG 16. Ganun ka specific.
SDG 16 talaga. Wala kaming SDG 16 talaga, but I'm proud to share, and I mentioned it earlier in my presentation, that we actually have the stakeholders chamber on the SDGs. I could say this is the first of its kind in the country, wherein we really institutionalized and formalized participatory engagement by providing this platform for private sector, CSOs, NGOs, the academe, media, and all other non-government entities to be our partners, active partners in achieving the 2030 agenda and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So this was established in 2021, or I think that was, 2021, late 2021. But we have been in full swing now. Actually, we have 65 members from the different sectors, as I mentioned. And the stakeholders chamber has 4 technical working groups on focusing on economic, social, peace, security, and governance, and environment sectors. So they are now, we have different groups that are focusing on those sectors. In fact, the stakeholders chamber has also been enrolled as a Philippine commitment in the National Action Plan of the Philippine Open Government Partnership. So there are really milestone goals that we have to meet to be able to also really strengthen the stakeholders chamber. So it's also actually putting where their mouth is. Hindi pwede ngayon, at this point in time, with barely 7 years left, 7 pa ba? 2023, 2030, no? Barely 7 years left to the 2030 agenda, that our CSO partners are only just, or the private sector are just talking. We want them to be active partners in attaining our national priority. So yes, there is a body that is really bringing to life this concept of participatory engagement. And what is very notable about this body is that it is under the DBCC's subcommittee on the SDGs. So now, actually, they have a way of wherein there is an intersection, there is a synergy between our various stakeholders and government. In fact, we have also brought it further because the stakeholders chamber is in fact chaired by PNVSCA and co-chaired by a member of that chamber. And we have brought it further by actually making the co-chair, which is the private sector, or in this case, it's PRRM. No, this year it's PRRM who sits as the co-chair of the chamber. PRRM, as a representative of the stakeholders chamber, sits in the subcommittee on the SDGs. So thereby, they have now one foot in the door to also influence policy discussion and help government and become an active partner for the SDGs.
Okay, thank you. Good to hear
Yeah.
that collaboration in action
Yes.
happening.
I'd also like to share that very recently, as part of our efforts to really push the SDGs, this is also pursuant to RA 11467 that has mandated that 20% of excise taxes on heated tobacco products, and vape, that these be allocated for SDG implementation. So the NEDA actually has spearheaded already the program convergence budgeting framework and guidelines on the utilization of the 20% allocation. And we have already received and in the process of approving PAPs that focus on SDGs that are lagging behind. So in this manner, we are able to really say that our projects are really geared towards addressing the regressing SDGs. So I'm happy to share that we are really actively working on this. So hopefully we have something good to report to Congress this year.
Okay, so nalobat na yung microphone ko. I think that signals that we need to end. But I'd like to give you each one a chance to give a final response to a question I would like to use to cap our Q&A, And I'd like to thank Michael from the Senate. I'd like to use your question to wrap up our Q&A portion. So the question here is, and you can give your personal thoughts on this, what would be your take on the recent rebranding of Bagong Pilipinas to that of increasing participation and accountability in our bureaucratic processes as backbone to our SDG attainment? So either one of you may want to give that response as a final.
Personally, okay lang, di ba? Bagong Pilipinas. We're all striving for a better Philippines. So whatever the term is, we are fully supportive. Siyempre, being NEDAN, we're all part of the planning process. And a part of, if not the main thrust of the Bagong Pilipinas, is to achieve this deep economic transformation so that we can be a more efficient government. We're able to create a more resilient Philippines. So whatever banner we are called, it's still one Philippines as we move towards that trajectory of achieving our national development plans. Anyway, the plans, they remain even across administrations. We are guided by the ambition natin 2040 of a matatag, maginawa, panatag na buhay. It will go through different administrations. So no matter what it is called, Bagong Pilipinas, it's still positive. We all need a change after all. So let's all be part of the change because as I said, when I opened my presentation, I said governance is going beyond just making that checklist. It's really fostering engagement and fostering change. So let's all be part of the change for Bagong Pilipinas.
Thank you,
Thank
Attorney
you.
Pure.
Yeah. I think if we really want to have Bagong Pilipinas, because we're so fond of slogans, rhetorics, narratives, each president tries to come up with a catchphrase to actually capture what he or she wants to represent as his or her image as president. But I hope this will really be followed through. This will really be implemented. And this will really be felt by people in the grassroots because that's usually the problem with many promises, with many catchphrases, with many rhetoric. They're good to hear, nice to hear. Government spends a lot of money on these catchphrases with a lot of new logo, with commercials, advertisements, but the bottom line is the change, hopefully positive change, will this matter for people on the ground? And I think they are the final decision makers if there is really change in their lives as a result of this government initiative and whether they are part of this change, because that's the important thing. Are they all, as they are not just beneficiaries, but they are also actively an active part of this in bringing about this change. No, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ella. Thank you, Attorney Pure, for this afternoon's very productive discussion. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you also to our participants, especially those who asked questions in the plenary and also those who provided questions through our online and even our lone question from the Facebook live feed. I think I was able to ask most of the questions thrown in the online platform, and I do apologize if there are some specific questions that I was not able to read anymore. But at this point, allow me to wrap up our discussion by giving a very brief synthesis. No? So, strengthening public accountability and participatory governance based on what we've heard from Attorney Pure and Dr. Ella requires 5 C's. No? As I was listening to them, I was able to identify 5 C's. First is commitment. Commitment in the way we do things in the government. To co-create solutions in recurring policy changes and encourage citizen trust in our institutions. So as Attorney Sapayan said, commitment is needed to call for action, for progress, so that we can really leave no one behind. Commitment also takes courage to remind ourselves that we need to monitor how the government performs our roles as efficient service providers. Number 2, the second C is creativity. It is important to encourage creativity in implementing policy and institutional reforms and introducing transformational improvements in the way we do things in government. The third C is collaboration. Involvement of people who have a stake in the development outcomes, such as a private sector, media groups, academe, international organizations, and civil society to have more grounded aspirations in driving the achievement of goals for national development. It is important to remind ourselves not to work in silos and continue engaging with multi-stakeholder partners, both locally and globally, to have a more holistic reform in promoting public accountability and strengthening participatory governance. Number 4C is citizen empowerment, improving the quality of their participation so that they have a more meaningful and genuine participation in the policy development and implementation processes that can impact their lives. As civil servants, it is also our mandate to work in the interest of the marginalized, promote social services for said communities, mobilize them for collective action, and promote civic engagement. It highlights that transparency and access to information in legislature to multiply the sources of accountability that can encourage more people to monitor how the government performs based on our mandates. So, as Dr. Ella said earlier in her session, it is important to note that sustainable development cannot be achieved without empowerment of the people on the ground. And the final C is capacity building. Capacity building in how we make sense of all this development, indicators, governance models, and approaches to localize, meaning global and local perspectives in looking at the policy problems so that we can have a clear and deeper understanding of how mechanisms for public accountability can promote transparency and citizen trust to strengthen human rights-based governance to help achieve the SDGs. So, with that, I hope I was able to cover everything. And we really had a very good discussions on public accountability and participatory governance for the achievement of our sustainable development goals. So, maraming salamat to everyone. Thank you very much to our resource person, our participants.
Thank
Okay.
you, Ma'am Aimee. So we've heard from our speakers. They even answered our questions. We've also heard synthesis from Ma'am Aimee. At this point, we'd like to hear from you, our scholars. So earlier, you were given instructions to provide your key takeaway for today's session. So I believe you were already able to input your answers through Menti. So at this point, we'll be sharing the results to everyone just to try to see and try to see if it meshes with the synthesis given by Miss Aimee. So can we show the results, please? Okay. So we see a lot of words and so for this, the bigger the words, it means the more of you inputted that as your answer. So it looks like a lot of you put in participatory governance, accountability, participation, transparency, human rights, sustainable development. So those are some of the things I'm seeing, and I think it really meshes well with, or it coincides with what we discussed earlier also. Okay, so thank you everyone. And at this point, we'd like to thank our speakers for taking the time to share your expertise with us. And we would like to also present you with our small token of appreciation. So, Attorney Pure and Dr. Ella, thank you very much again for your time. Sa uulitin po. Let's take a picture po muna. while they're taking pictures, as we close our first lecture for 2024, we thank our invited guests, CBILLS participant and Facebook Live viewers who stayed throughout the lecture, and to our colleagues in the Development Academy of the Philippines for the logistical support as well, for helping us reach a wider audience for today's lecture through social media, cross-posting, and email. Lastly, we would like to thank the Senate and especially the House of Representatives for hosting today's event. So last and very important order of business, it's very rare that we'll have everyone in one room. So let's take this opportunity. Medyo pahirapan natin yung photographers. Let's try to take a picture of the whole room with our guests po. So, baba na lang po. So, palapit na lang po tayo as close as we can get to the center. Let's try to compress more po to the center. Pa-center po. Sir.